Welcome back to Black History Year, where we celebrate Black culture and question everything they taught us in school. If you're ready for the real history, hit like and subscribe. Now, let's get it.
We'll try to build a bridge and through line thinking about Black horror, the relationship between anti-Blackness and horror, and notions of Black liberation. But with all that said, I'm just curious, fam, if you had to sum up what Black liberation looks like, feels like, what it is for you, how would you respond?
Hmm. I mean, I think Black liberation is not only having the agency, over your own life, but also to be fearless. You know,
Mm.
yeah. Because think about it. Because we have lived under oppression, since we got here, and we still have like various levels of systemic issues that actually like upend our agency and upend our. I mean, right now we're fighting against like people just trying to destroy our history and like erase our history right now, knowing full well that when you erase someone's history, you erase their future at the same time. Because if you don't know your history, then you don't know where you're going or who you are, and that's one of the really insidious things about chattel slavery, right? Is that it unmade us or it disrupted our development as a people. So yeah, I'm thinking like definitely having agency and being fearless when applying that agency is Black liberation. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, we. Oh, man. No, that's such a powerful place to start. Um, I'm sorry, producers. I may have to swerve a little bit from our original organized outline.
Hmm.
I love this notion of Black liberation being tied to some sense of fearlessness. And
Hmm.
that's so interesting to me, specifically for today's conversation, because we're thinking through horror.
That's right.
Uh, yeah, I'm wondering, just at a very high level, before we even start thinking about like how horror is able to adapt like social issues and whatnot, how might horror teach us to be fearless?
Well, okay. So one of the things I deal with two things. First of all, in my Afrofuturism classes, because I teach courses on Afrofuturism too, and so my first course that I teach is called Afrofuturism and Visual Culture. So it's about like it's kind of like an intro to Afrofuturism as a construct, or just Black speculative culture in general. The idea of Black speculation and possibility, right? I think is a huge part of it. And so I came up with this notion along with my friend Dr. Clint Fluker. We wrote about this idea of liberation technologies, right? Or like the idea that storytelling, art making is a type of technology that we can use to actually liberate ourselves. And if you think about it, throughout our history, we have always been a people that utilizes our culture and our art and our language and our way of motion, our way of dress as ways to push back against oppression. You know, these are liberation technologies, right? So that's the first thing. So the other thing you have to remember too is like, talking about hope and darkness, is part of human nature. Like, so for instance, we've always had like spook stories and, stories about the dark, that actually like are morality tales. Most horror stories are morality tales, if you think about it. Like, so if you do these things, then this happens kind of thing, right? Most of them are. And so I think those are coming from a moral center. The other thing is that to get to the Afrofuture, and this is, I came up with this term called ethnogothic, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So me and my friend Stanford Carpenter were thinking about the limitations of the term Afrofuturism, and it's a good place to start. I mean, and Black speculative culture is such a mouthful, you know what I'm saying? It's like Black speculative culture or Black speculative arts, it's like too many syllables. But Afrofuturism it's a catch-all to start a conversation into other spin-offs, right? And of course, coming from like the academy, we're very concerned with genre and tropes, that kind of stuff. Like, what are the things that make it this, right? And that's how you have conversations about it. But I was having a conversation one time with Terrence Nance, the filmmaker, and we are talking about like that is a type of colonization too. That's a type of violence. Like when you name something, you are trying to claim it so you can put a sticker on it, put it in a curiosity cabinet, you understand it. That's how you colonize something too. So not having a name for something is actually also very potent, but that's another story. But anyway, so you familiar with this song Bag Lady by Erica Badu?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the narrative of it is like Badu is watching a bag lady, right? Struggle with the bags, right? And she's trying to catch a bus, right? You gonna miss your bus, right? You know what I'm saying? So imagine that the bus is going into the Afro future, right? That bus is going to the Afrofuture. This is just a allegory, right? So, what's in those bags is stopping her from getting on the Afrofuture bus? The baggage from oppression, the baggage from violence, the baggage from like trauma. Because you got to let it go, let it go, let it go, let it go, right? Yeah. So, what you do is you open up those bags and you got demons and monsters and ghosts and scary things, werewolves and violence, all this type of stuff, right? But when you name something and you give it a form, you can defeat it. You understand it better. And you can either like accept it, you know, like the film The Babadook, which the Babadook is about trauma, right? So either you don't do anything with, have you ever seen The Babadook?
I haven't.
So at the end of it, I'm just going to spoil it for you because you should have seen it. Anyway, so like the Babadook represents grief. They don't defeat the monster. At the end of it, the monster is living in the basement and they're feeding it and they're taking care of it and they're playing with it, you know, because grief never goes away. You see what I'm saying? It actually still stays with you. You understand how to relate to it. So our trauma is not going to go away, but we find different mechanisms to actually like deal with that trauma, to move into the future, you see. And so horror gives us agency over the fear. It lets us control it. And the other thing too is that, you know, when we are in charge of the horror, you know, we can control the monsters. But for so long, we have been the monsters, right? We were the monsters. First of all, we're not in the narratives. And then when we are in the narratives, they create monsters that represent us, right? Wow. And then they kill us, you know. So a lot of times you see in movies like the black person's the first person to die, you know. I mean, there's a great documentary called Horror Noir that's based on Robin Means Coleman's book, Horror Noir. It's on Shudder, and it's a wonderful documentary where it's co-produced by the great Tananarive Due, you know, and they talk about the history of representation in horror. So what we're in now is a renaissance of black filmmakers really leaning into the stuff that they grew up watching and actually giving us freedom to talk about the types of things that scare us. That's why Get Out was so powerful and so potent. We understand that fear, you know, because the same fear we were just talking about, Lakeith Stanfield was feeling that when he was walking at the beginning of that movie.
That was one of the scariest scenes I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Even more so than the whole film.
Yeah. Because the idea of, and this is what I'm talking about with particular black fears. So we talk about like being fearless is being liberated, right? So think about all the black mothers out of fear that would downplay their children, particularly their sons, to actually survive. Oh no, master, he's stupid. Oh no, master, he's lame. You know, no, he doesn't right in the head. You know, he's not smart. You know, don't sell. You know, that's how they would protect their sons from being sold, right? That kind of stuff, right? So that becomes a type of trauma that we engender, right? No, he's no good. You don't want to. No, he's stupid. You know, that kind of stuff, right? So that fear is, you know, that was a mode of protecting that actually still like, you know, perpetuates, right? And so that idea of agency and fearlessness, I think, goes hand in hand, you know. And now we can reclaim those things, have a conversation about what has happened to our people, and then let it go, and actually have fun in the space. You know what I'm saying? I grew up loving horror since I was a kid. Like, my mother is a massive horror fan. She still watch horror movies. Like, we have conversations. That and action movies. You know, I probably watched a lot of inappropriate stuff when I was coming up. So, yeah, but those are my thoughts about it to start with. But, and that's kind of like where I teach from. I look at like, what are the different tenets of black horror? You know, like, you know, how does African religion gets demonized? Like Vodun and Candomblé and Obia and all these different like religious spaces around spirituality. You know, these things have been demonized, and we've internalized that too. Like these are our spiritual connections to our homeland or from our place of ancestry. But because we live in this quote unquote Christian nation, sorry, I couldn't even get that out right without laughing. We live in this Christian nation that has told us that our ancestors, our way of knowing things is incorrect.
Well, this is something I want to hold on to for a second.
Of course, yeah.
I love how you spoke to earlier, the erasing of people's history is a way of erasing their future.
Yes.
And one thing that we really hold on to here at PushBlack is this notion of the oral tradition. as a way of carrying our histories. And when we think about the oral tradition, specifically in relationship to horror, ghost stories, things of that
Hmm.
nature, what comes to mind are stories like haint tales,
Yep.
trickster stories, conjure
Yes.
narratives. You spoke about this a bit earlier, but I'm curious if you could say a bit more about their role in protection, guidance, and resistance.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think definitely. I mean, so I grew, like I said, I grew up in the South, and so I'm very familiar with those stories. Like I grew up in the deep South, poor, black, and my grandmother was, helped raise me, right? And and she had belief structures and sayings and practices that she didn't explicitly say were hoodoo or conjure, but now with my research, I realized that she probably was a conjure woman because she would use like remedies from the forest. She would make teas and tinctures and poultices and stuff like that she would use to make us better. It would be nasty, but we'd feel better. Like, what is this? Just drink it, boy. That kind of, it's good for you, you know. And, those practices, I think, are coming directly from Africa. They're coming from like, you know, a system of matrilineal knowledge, that is very powerful, But in general, witches and witchcraft have been demonized in Western society because it was undercutting the burgeoning systems of medical practices. You know what I'm saying? Let's get rid of that folklore. Let's get rid of
Yeah.
that. So a lot of horror deals with that. That's what Dracula's about. Old systems encroaching on the new system. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, because he's coming from the old world and he's in the modern space, and he's tainting our blood. And that's the narrative that's happening now with immigrants, right? You're tainting our blood. That kind of stuff. Anyway, so these particular things, these oral traditions, our songs, our poetry, our prayers, our belief structures, are, to borrow from John Aconfora, black secret technologies, right? Black secret technologies that we can utilize and fight back and actually connect ourselves to our homeland. The older I get, the more southern I become. I feel.
I love
And the
that.
older I get, the more I'm from Mississippi. You know, I was so eager to get out of that space. Because I could I felt like I was not meant to be there. You know what I'm saying? But what it was that my ancestors were probably pushing me out to bring me back full circle. To take what I've learned and take it out to the world. And so like most of my stories, are connected to the South. Like my Blue Hand Mojo character. He's a conjure man that goes up to Chicago, and he's trying to save his soul, and he works with the devil. He's trying to save his soul. So it's like this, this narrative that's structured around conjure and protection, and yeah, the idea of these monsters and spirits that we create, these haints that we create, they're teaching us something that we need to actually heed to, because all this technology and all these different newfangled ideas, so to speak, they get in the way. And sometimes you just need to sit still and be quiet. We're not quiet enough, actually, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Phil. One thing I hate this notion of origin points when we think about histories. But I'm trying to find just a historical moment, a historical object to try to ground folks in thinking about the relationship between anti-blackness and horror, at least in the imaginary. Uh, how did that come to be? So we know about the transatlantic slave trade, but when did we start to see, um, yeah, just horror adopting some of the thinking of white supremacy? Um, yeah, where does that nexus of like monsters, bodies, and blackness begin?
I think, it's funny because I used to study stereotypes, right? That's one of the things that led me down the path that I am. I was a stereotype hunter, you know? Yeah, because I was looking at like graphic design and I wasn't seeing myself being reflected at me, you know. And I went to HBCU. I went to Jackson State University for art, in Mississippi. And when I went to University of Illinois, I understood, oh my God, we are marginalized. I was like, oh dear, I understand now. And you had these ideas of like sundown towns and stuff around, there's a lot of those in the Midwest. There's a couple out here in California, actually, truth be told. But
Okay.
so, I think well, first of all, the term stereotype is a printing term. I always talk about this. It comes from the printing production. I want to say it was created in the mid 1800s by the Didot family, Furman Didot. It's Didot. There's a typeface named after him. You know, they were printers and paper makers essentially from France. And so the stereotype was basically, if you had to, like, say, create a book or something that had a set of type that never moved, it was always the same. They would set it all as one big, like, page, you know, and then they would use like paper mache to make it.
Okay.
You know, and so that's where the stereotype comes from. It doesn't really get used the way that we think about it until the early 20s, by like Walter Lippmann. I think 1922, 1923, something like that, because he was analyzing how, in the burgeoning modern era, like how people were judging each other, you know. And so the root word of stereotype is stereos, which is the Greek word which means hard or fixed. So stereotypes are about fixity. So most of our lives, we're trying to escape the fixity, you know. We're trying to actually like really dial into the subjectivity of ourselves, right? So the stereotype is an analog for what people think we are, and so it could be one characteristic that they just make into your entire existence. You know what I'm saying? So that's the thing. So stereotypes have functions too. So for instance, when the South creates the idea of the happy slave, you know, or the mammy, you know, that's a very useful little monster, right? It's a useful creature, you know, right? Or the Rastas, these uncles, you know, you know, they're happy down here. We're taking care of them and stuff. You see the rise of the Jezebel, the black buck, the angry black man after, you know, slavery. They become extremely useful because then they can legitimize our lynching. They can legitimize, oh, they're going to rape everybody and kill everybody. So in that video I was talking about, they talk about Birth of a Nation as a horror movie, you know what I'm saying, where basically you have a white man in blackface who's pretending to be this brutish black character, and the superheroes are the Klan. They put on these masks, they put on costumes, they go after the villain, you know. Oh. And then also, too, you know, they demonize, you know, black intellectuality, you know, and actually make fun of it through, like, the Jim Crow, the Zip Coon, all these different stereotypes are very useful in propaganda, you know. And I want to say, like, Birth of a Nation did a really, really horrible, I mean, it did a great job for them, but it did a horrible job for, like, you know, spreading the gospel as far as, like, how black people are. And you know what? Most people are kind of lazy, you know. They don't go, some people have probably even never met a black person before in their lives. And so, you know, they won't go and do any digging and understand, like, you know, that that people have these connections with each other. We always look at difference. We don't look at what's similar, right? So, you know, it dials into your fear. So that's where, like, you know, laws came from to make sure that we had no upward mobility, to make sure that we stayed down, to make sure that we were, you know, not you know, we weren't seen differently, right? So this is a demonization and a monstrization, if you want to call it that, of blackness and anti-blackness through storytelling. Propaganda dials into the worst aspects. It's like, it's very straightforward. There's no like, it's all emotional, you know. So the most emotional, the most powerful emotions, you know, love, fear, you know, fear, and hatred, you know, these types of things. That's where we are now. You know what I'm saying? You know, yeah. So it's like, yeah. So that's where the storytelling starts. You know, is with these. So if you look at, like, blackface minstrelsy, I mean, really, like, when they're doing the minstrel shows, those are entertaining. They have control over those. You know, love you, boss, that kind of thing, right? And they get to strip us of our humanity and live inside of our skins, right? Yeah, and so you have this kind of, like, rage and hatred, but also utter fascination with blackness that actually undergirds, like, the very fabric of our country, you know? It really does. You know what I'm saying? Like, they've always been fascinated with us, you know, but also hate us because we're so beautiful.
Yeah, it's
because
really...
we're so beautiful. You know what I'm saying? We're so powerful. Like, how are you still here? You know, we tried to kill you. We owned you, and you're still pervasive. And so, I mean, honestly, like, if the Red Summer hadn't happened, if like Tulsa and all this, like, it's in all the different laws and stuff, we're still in the middle of actually overcoming, you know, the progeny of our oppressors still, you know? So that makes us monsters, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway.
This leads me to a. Let me know if this question landed unfair or too much. Uh,
Okay.
would it be fair, John, to say that, especially in light of the history you just laid out for us, and also thinking about the ways that horror reflects societal fears, anxieties, and whatnot, John, would it be fair to say that the white world, the white imaginary, fears Black liberation most?
Oh yeah. Oh
Mm,
yes. Yeah, because here's the thing. So when I think about the construction, because we didn't create blackness. That's first thing. We didn't
mm-hmm,
make it up. Not from the standpoint in this Western space. You know, blackness, the Negro, was created as a antithesis to whiteness. We are supposed to be everything that whiteness isn't.
mm-hmm.
We are ugly. We are supposed to be stupid. We're supposed to be ravenous and wanton, and we need to be tamed. We're ignorant. Our work has no value. We have no value. And that's what you have to tell yourself. But what happens when the shadow that you've created actually starts to have its own stories, if it has its own history? I always tell my students about, you ever seen Peter Pan, the animated Peter
Yeah.
Pan?
Yeah.
So you know how, like, what's the first thing you see? When Wendy meets Peter, what is he chasing? His shadow. He's
Ah.
trying to, and what is he trying to do? He's trying to reattach his shadow. Because what is that thing without his shadow? Whiteness has no meaning without us. So yeah, they have to keep us in a space where we are under them. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yeah. So yes, being free and being able to do our things, because then what happens if we don't need white supremacy? You know what I'm saying? What are we then? Then we get to decide what our future is.
Mm.
That's a different type of fear too.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So I'm thinking about Black folks as shadows now being able to tell our own stories.
Mm-hmm.
Curious, John, in your experience, do you find like any key significant differences between Black horror made by Black creators versus Black horror stories told through a white lens?
That's a good question. I think that there are some directors that have white directors who have a certain lock on society, because again, horror is about like our societal fears. You know what I'm saying? If you look at, like, say, the first really big uptick of horror post Second World War, think about it. Like, so after the Second World War, we know that we can destroy ourselves with the click of a button, right? Radiation is everywhere. We don't understand it, then, we're in the middle of a Cold War. So what do you see? You see alien stories, right? You see creatures that can, creatures that are mutated, you see, aliens that look like humans but aren't humans, like in Body Snatchers. You have like shape-shifting aliens, like in Thing from Another World. So, all the different stories. And also, too, in the comics are riddled with horror in the 1950s, from like Tales from the Crypt and all that kind of
Ah,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, those are really popular because the zeitgeist is about terror. It's like, oh my God, we just survived the Second World War. What now? There's so much stuff going on, right? So, the people who I think are open to understanding like horror as a useful tool to talk about anxiety and about like cultural anxieties, right? People who have really handled blackness and horror very well is people like, what's his name? They did, the Night of the Living Dead,
Oh, George Romero. Yeah.
Romero. Yeah, Romero, man, that movie is so black. Oh my goodness. Because blackness is also a political mindset, right? So,
Ah,
you know what I'm
yes.
saying? You have the politics of what it means to be black. If you're anti-white, what are you as far as like anti-white supremacy, Then, so that's an anti-white supremacist film to me, because it's really talking, because, look who's in charge, and
Yeah, yeah.
also, but also look at the horrors of like when the main character is killed at the end,
The real monsters
the
revealed,
real
huh?
monsters come, right? Exactly. So it's like this juxtaposition that really punches you in the stomach. You know what I'm saying? Another one, of course, is the People Under the Stairs. The
Yeah,
Wes
yeah.
Craven. Yeah, the West. That's a black movie, man, because you're looking at like the lead is a black man, as a black boy, and it's talking about the degradation and the oppression of the hood, by hyper capitalists, mutated, inbred families of white people who own everything. I mean, so we're talking about like gentrification and like control of black space. Man, that's a really black film, and that's a white director. So I think that yeah, you can have these uplifting spaces, but then of course you have these message movies like Tales from the Hood.
Okay, okay. I got to
Yeah,
pause. I
so
got to pause you on
yeah,
that because
yeah, so
we got to dig into that.
yeah.
Yes. Okay. Enough them. I do got a personal question for you.
Yeah.
In relationship to the wonderful anthology you put together, Shook.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
Indeed. If you could just tell us a little bit about your motivation for putting that together, and then also, I guess the personal question: what do you feel makes a good horror story a good horror story?
Okay, those are good questions. So I didn't do a lot of the. Okay, so Shook was a name that I always wanted to use for some type of black magazine or some type of black horror anthology. I've always wanted that. And so then I met my dudes, Marcus and Bradley. Bradley Golden is the CEO of Second Sight, and he's from Mississippi. Actually, it's a Mississippi owned like predominantly horror comics company. And Marcus Roberts, who is in Florida, is his like creative officer. So we became friends. We've been following each other's careers for a little bit, and we were just having conversations and stuff. And they had been reaching out to different. It's just happened to be black men, actually. People like David Walker, Kevin Grievous, who created the Underworld series. I mean, some pretty high dollar people, and they wanted to put together an anthology, and I came up with the name. I already had the name, and so a lot of the editorial stuff was on them. I did like I already had the logo design, and I did the cover design and stuff like that. And I have 2 stories in there. Those stories are old too, by the way. They had been sitting on my computer for a long time. They were not new stories. They had just been, yeah, those are some of the first 2 like stories I'd ever written. Period.
Oh wow.
They had just been sitting there, and yeah, and so this was a chance to get those out. But I think we're kind of trying to bring notoriety to the fact that the anthology is still a really great storytelling vehicle, and that you really hadn't seen a lot of like solid like black horror in that particular space. And I'm really excited that it did so well. But really, I got to give my hat, I got to tip my hat to Bradley and Marcus, because they were the driving force behind it. I was really proud to be a part of it, And I still want to do more actually too, because we're doing a follow-up book called Songs to the Dark Sirens, which is all black women actually. Because I have to say, like, one of the first things I noticed was like, bros, there was no women in here. So I was like, it was too late to fix it at that particular point, and that was an oversight that we were trying to to course correct. So the second book is actually edited by a black woman named Colleen Douglas, who's a great writer from England, black woman from England.
Okay.
And so yeah, so that's how that came about. Now, as far as like what makes a good horror story, just in general.
Yeah.
So the first thing I want to get across is that there are different levels of being scared. You know what I'm saying? That's the first thing.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, the first thing in a good horror story is the anticipation or the dread. That feeling in your stomach that something's about to happen. You know what I'm saying? That's part of every story. Like, what's about to happen? But you know that when you're telling a story in any genre, first you have to do is you have to understand, like, you have to do a scene or something to tell people what kind of story it is. Mm-hmm. So you notice, like, at the beginning of most horror stories, you have like an opening gambit. Something happens, there's weird music, something tells you that you're about to watch a horror story. You know what I'm saying? So it sets you up with a certain set of expectations, that kind of thing. So dread is a huge part of that.
Yeah.
Another thing is the inciting incident. You have to have some type of trauma has to happen, whether physical or psychological. There's got to be a traumatic incident, because horror does deal with trauma. It deals with some type of fear. And that's what you're willingly engaging with that, right? Another aspect is repulsion. So, for instance, you ever see a horror movie where people, like, they walk into a crypt and they go, oh, they throw up, or they're like, or like, what's that smell? That kind of thing. Ever see like a movie like The Thing, where they're cutting open the thing, and one of the dudes says, why does it smell like that? Saying, so it's because when you're smelling something, you're tasting at the same time. So it's like, it's really disgusting. You're like, oh my God. So that's a manifestation of the horror, right? Then you have terror. Terror actually is, you know, if something is terrorizing you, then it's actually trying to cause you physical harm, So you have a conflagration of all these different. If someone is terrorizing you, that's why they use the word terrorist. I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to hurt your physical. Yeah. Horror is the thing that's left over after all this other stuff is left. So for instance, so when someone says that movie wasn't even scary, because being scared is a physical reaction, and it's like that. Like that's why jump scares suck.
Right.
Jump scares are terrible. Like and you're like So someone's like, if they don't have a lot of jump scares, then it's not a scary movie. No, a horror movie is a thing that stays with you long after the credits roll. That's horror, Like the Human Centipede is nasty, whatever, and it's got scary moments and stuff. It's disgusting, but the horror of being stuck between two dead bodies and no one can save you, that's horror, Yeah. So when I watched Hereditary, for instance, I felt like the movie left with me like as a creature, and it was stuck to me. Like I felt used and dirty after. I was like, oh my God, And it's like, the horror is like, oh yeah, that's one of the most terrible things I've ever dealt with in my life. And so when I'm teaching horror, when I teach my horror class, the first thing I deal with is real terror, like real horror, real black horror. So I talk about the lynching. I talk about like the stories about like these horrible things that happen to black people first. And then I tell them like, now that you've been exposed to this, everything else that we're going to watch is meaningless to you. Because once you've understood that these things have happened to people for real, there's nothing that I can show you that's worse.
Yo, that's so real, John. When myself and the producer Sydney, Leslie, and Lynn were thinking through this particular topic, this is something I often land on when I think about the horror genre. And thank you for mentioning just how weak jump cuts are.
Yes,
Often, this shit just don't land with me. And when I look at our actual history, that shit is way more. Not even just the history, the contemporary landscape that we're in. That shit is way more terrifying.
It's way more horrific and terrifying. Yes,
trying to eat me or jump out of the bushes and grab me.
Right. Yeah. Well, and the thing, so horror is also on the other side is, horror and comedy are actually very related too.
Huh.
Yeah. That's why I think Jordan Peele is such a good horror filmmaker, because he's such a good comedian. You think about like I told him, because I actually had a chance to meet him when I first moved out here, and we talked for actually a couple of hours,
Wow.
and yeah, it was really cool. And so I told him that one of the things that made me realize three skits actually that made me realize that he was into horror. One was the racist zombie. Sorry, what the heck is that? I'm so sorry. I thought I had turned all that stuff off. I hope y'all can fix that in post. I don't know if there's a post. Anyway, the one with the racist zombies that wouldn't eat black people. So all the black people had a cookout, and all the white people being attacked by the zombies. I was like, that was funny. The other one was the band that was trapped inside of a music video. And the party keeps going, and it's something like and we keep going, and they're like, why are we still in this video? So it's almost like the group itself is stuck inside a movie, and that's terrifying. That's actually horrifying. I was like, that was messed up, but also funny, but terrifying. The last one was these two, Key and Peele are in like a soul food restaurant, and they keep upping the ante. At the end of it, yeah, man, can I get like some barbed wire with gravy? That kind of stuff. Some barbed wire. And she's like, okay, no, what I want half of a barn door, with some pork chops with a human foot, nailed to the door, right? And she was like, you want a human foot? And he was like, yeah. And then the next scene, she said, you want some tea with that, or you want some else to go with that? So the next scene is they're trying to eat like the stuff that they just ordered. Like they're trying to eat barbed wire, eat the dough. It's hilarious, but it's also like, I knew then, I was like, yeah, this dude is actually into scary stuff, Anyway.
Word. No, I appreciate you sharing that, fam. And actually, we are going to touch upon some kind of other critical aspects here, but I kind of want to sit with this kind of line of entertainment here.
Yeah.
And you already kind of mentioned some of these films. I kind of want to just think through maybe three at most. going to rattle off a list of what we've internally tried to identify as like classic black horror films. Everybody. So I'm gonna just read off a list, and you pick three, and let us know why you feel that they're must see, or why we could miss them, or what's generative about them in general.
Okay.
Okay, so here's a list, just seven. We got Ganja and Hess, 1970. White Dog, 1982. Tales from the Hood, 1995. Eve's Bayou, 1997. Beloved, 1998. We got Lovecraft County, 2020. And I do want to include another. Where is it? The Skeleton Key.
Interesting. Okay, that's an interesting collection. So, I think Ganja and Hess is definitely like a seminal film that you should check out, because not necessarily it's like the most terrifying. It is a vampire story, right? It's very abstract. I think the making of the film is actually just as interesting as the film itself, because when they hired the filmmaker, who's in the movie as by the way, he's a gentleman that's sitting in the tree, you know. Yeah. So the filmmakers wanted him to make like another Blackula, essentially, right? Yeah, because in any industry, in any entertainment industry, people don't care about making knockoffs of things. It's just, hey, like, make me, I want a Blackula movie, right? So he was like, no, and so he actually made this really like thoughtful, strange, erudite, like effete film, that's actually like an art house movie, that's about, blackness and Christianity and about our relationship to America. It's just a strange film, and I think, it's not necessarily like people are going to watch and be like, what the hell is this movie about?
Yeah.
And I'm not scared by it, but it poses some interesting questions about faith and about blackness that I think, are very introspective, So yeah, just go into it knowing that it's very esoteric and strange, Is it terrifying? And to me, no. But I watch a lot of horror movies though. Some people, there's a scene with a dude like drinking blood off the floor, that might be off-putting to people. But, other than that, I've seen too much. So I'm like, I've seen way too much. White Dog is that's an interesting film because, I never thought of it as being horror, but I guess it could be, huh? It's about this was it Paul Winfield, right? And basically he comes across this white dog that's been trained to attack black people, right? And at the end of it, they can't untrain the dog, as I recall, right?
Right.
So that's an interesting conversation. I've never taught it, but maybe I should. I've never thought of it as a horror movie, but I guess there is a horrific aspect to it because it's about like the plague of racism. It's about like, racism as a type of sickness, that infects things, and you have to. So he's not even. So yeah, see, that's a good one too. But I never thought of it as a horror movie. But yeah, I could see it being horrific actually, particularly if you have a strong connection to animals, that kind of thing, right? So what was the other one? You said
We got Tales from the Hood.
Tales from the Hood I teach that every year.
When you were talking earlier about horror being something that stays with you,
Yeah.
oh God, I think I've only seen that film entirely like one fucking time when I was a kid. And I remember so much so vividly to the point where I don't need to return back to it.
Yeah.
What can you share with us about Tales from the Hood?
Well, Tales from the Hood is interesting because it leans into the idea of the anthology, which is a classic format for speculative fiction in general. The idea of the interlocutor, like the Crypt Keeper character, right? That comes from radio, actually. When they used to do like radio shows back in the day, they had an old witch telling you a story. Let me tell you a story, that kind of thing. And then, so it starts in the radio, and then it gets into the comic books. That's where you get characters like, the Crypt Keeper and the Vault Keeper and characters like that. Later on, you get characters like Cain and Abel from like, from DC Comics, from like Tales, with House of Mystery and House of Secrets. You have these like, I call them like storyteller, like interlocutor characters, right? Where they're the people that are leading you into the story, and also the same thing with Creepy and Eerie. You got Cousin Creepy and Uncle Eerie, or was it Uncle Creepy and Cousin Eerie, I think, from Warren Magazine. So these are all magazines and stuff. So this is a tradition that is fueling Tales from the Hood. Our interlocutor character is, well, we don't know it, is Mr. Sims, but he's the devil, right? So he's our Crypt Keeper character, who is, showing our people who are looking, these brothers who are looking for the shit. And they're looking for the shit. Oh, you want the shit? Okay. So, but these are morality tales. They're all morality tales. Like I said, so these are definitely like, as Keenan Ivory Wayans, from that movie, he was like, message, message. Yeah, message movies, right? So we're in the middle of like a time when there's a lot of crack on the streets and like there's a lot of gang activity, and people are utilizing horror to empower the youth and to have these stories and stuff. I think also too, it dials really well into the comedy side too, because Rusty Cundy, his first movie is a comedy. It's a comedy satire. Fear of a Black Hat. Yeah, Fear of a Black Hat. It's a satire. So he's a comedian. Like, so he's writing from a comedy standpoint, but he also is bringing a very serious, conversation about like child abuse and spousal abuse, and about like, crooked cops, and about like, the culpability of Black police, that kind of stuff. Is really, really interesting, deep conversations, Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, so that's a seminal. That's seminal to me. Yes, definitely. What was the next one? You said Lovecraft Country. Oh no, Eve's Bayou, right?
Yeah. We had Eve's Bayou in there. We're kind of hesitant on like how do we position those.
Yeah, Eve's Bayou I think is horrific. Because it's kind of it's a Black Gothic, Southern Gothic story, and it's about the family secrets, and it also like looks at like the demonization of Black womanhood, or that kind of thing is in there too, and also the repulsion of like Black spiritual practices as well, and the things that tear us apart, about Black masculinity. It's a really, really creepy, seductive film. It's beautiful though, and it's horror in a different way, because one of the things that I like about horror is that it has a spectrum. You have like stuff that's like splatterpunk, like, oh my god, that's nasty, to like Gothic horror, which is more like ghosts and goblins and stuff, but also cosmic horror, stuff like that, otherworldly things, which leads us to Lovecraft Country, right? Which is, is a lot more cosmic, right? And so Lovecraft Country as a TV show, it takes a novel that's exploring the really racist ideologies of H.P. Lovecraft and turning them inside out. Because Lovecraft is interesting because he was the prototypical xenophobe, but his ideas are so interesting as far as like otherworldly creatures that are coming to attack us. He has influenced like pretty much every horror writer working, including people like N.K. Jemisin, for instance. So what's interesting? So what happens when you take a character like that, a man like that, and then Black people, Asian people, Latino people, Hispanic folk, interact with that narrative, and that's what Lovecraft Country does. It gives us a spectrum. Yeah, I don't teach the whole series. I teach like certain ones because she's playing around with pulp stories, right? So one is like an Indiana Jones story.
Yeah.
There's another, and people thought it was disjointed, but I saw what she was doing. She was exploring. She was putting Black people into the spectrum of speculation. So you got science fiction story, you got time travel story, right? But a lot of it is about redemption, and horror. And so like one of my favorite, even though it's traumatic as hell, is when they time travel back to Tulsa, and mind you, this is during like the height of a lot of horror. This is in the middle of the George Floyd protest when this TV show is on. I needed to see a Black woman who was indestructible walking down the streets of Tulsa. I needed to see that. I needed to hear that opera that was created from Sonia Sanchez's "Where Is Your Fire." I mean, come on now. It was feeding me in a way that I didn't know I needed to be fed. I cried that whole episode, but tears of joy mostly, like just to be moved like that. I needed to see that. And but the episodes I teach the most are Sundown, the pilot episode, where we actually do see, the scary monster is a racist sheriff, right? Mm-hmm. The tension when that car is behind them and they can't go too fast and the sun is setting. Ooh, Lord, that's nothing like that terror. And the other one is, of course, Holy Ghost, when they have the doctor that's experimenting on people, and it's about it's the blockbusting, you know what I'm saying? She moves to the north side and they're trying to kick her out of there, but there's a racist spirit in the damn house, and she got to bring what does she combat it with? Ancient African oral traditions and spirituality, and they pray together as a community. They with those spirits, she pushes that spirit up out of her house. Now, I thought it was a shame that her and Jonathan Majors did not get Emmys for that, because they were acting. That was acting. So Journey Smollett and Majors, man, he was possessed, and she was trying to get that thing up out of her man. I was like, man, this is, whew, that was great. What's the other? I'm sorry, I went off. So
there's one last one. What
was the other one?
This was a bit prickly. So, Beloved.
So Beloved, I don't know. I've taught Beloved in my horror classes. Yes, definitely. Because see, the thing is like, one thing I always talk about is the fact that there's a stigma on speculative writing, But to me, Toni Morrison is a speculative fiction writer. She writes from a very surreal, Afro-surreal space. I mean, she was really influenced by Henry Dumas as a writer, and they created the word Afro-surrealism in America to deal with his work. So yeah, I think it's surreal and strange. I mean, it's a ghost story and a possession story. You know what I'm saying? It's about a poltergeist who comes back as a revenant. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, come on now, that's a ghost. That's a horror story, and it's in response to the heinous act where Sita has to actually like kill her child in order to save it from. That's horrific, man. That's horror story. That's scary. Okay. But you miss, so I'm looking at stuff like hardly anybody talks about Sugar Hill.
Huh.
No, not the Wesley Snipes Sugar Hill.
Oh, okay. I was thinking about Wesley Snipes. Okay.
No, I'm talking about the blaxploitation movie Sugar Hill. It's about a woman named Sugar Hill. Her man is killed by the mob, and it happens in New Orleans, and she calls on Baron Samedi to kill them.
Holy
Have you not seen this movie? Yeah.
No. Is Bones a riff off of that or something?
Yeah, no. Well, Bones, I feel like is a riff off of JD's Revenge, which is also really good. I teach that too, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, it's about a hustler pimp who gets killed by his best friend and his girlfriend, and he comes back. He possesses a young law student. Mm-hmm. You seen JD's Revenge? That's a good one. Glenn Turman plays the main character. Yeah.
No, thank you.
Yeah, so I teach all those. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Something came up when we were discussing Beloved, and I'm curious how to situate this critically. Mm-hmm. So some of us, we talked about how when we were younger, when we were exposed to Beloved, our immediate reaction wasn't visceral horror. It was actually almost like a comedic response. I kind of want to ask about this notion of the oppositional gaze that comes to us through bell hooks. And what I want to ask, John, is do you feel it's fair to say that Black audiences experience horror differently from other audiences? I'm thinking about also Black folks talking back to the screen in the theater.
Yes. Yeah.
What can you share with us on that?
Yeah, I think that, let's just say it like this. For instance, I think that we have normalized the idea of our ancestors being with us. You know what I'm saying? That's a tradition that comes from Africa. Like, often like African writers, like people who are from the continent, they don't look at their work as being speculative, right? It's like, no, this is just literature. My friend Nadia Corafor talks about that a lot in her work because she's an African futurist, right? So she talks about the fact that the ancestral plane is one with our plane, So it's the West that actually gives us these traditions that you demonize it. See, some spirits are going to help you. You know what I'm saying? So it's like we actually have learned to like demonize ghosts and demonize the other, stuff like that. But, Rusty Condiff on that documentary, he said like his father used to tell him like, son, you ain't gonna be scared of no ghosts. You gotta be afraid of the people that are living. That's the scary part is the people that's gonna hurt you. Ghosts can't hurt you. So I think that our connection to that oral tradition, to that spirituality is something that kind of galvanizes us. Also too, man, that pain and trauma is in our DNA.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? We've been through it. With our ancestors, we've been through it. We understand how bad things can get. We are the canary in the coal mine. So when we're telling you, hey, don't vote for this dude because we've seen this before, you need to listen to us. And so, and you have tons and tons of people, because of their internalized hatred of Black people, will not listen to us. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, no, we were warning you. We've lived through it. We actually have shown you how to fight. Please listen. That in itself is a horror story, actually. you know.
It
And
did.
actually, you know, it's funny because that reminds me of an episode of the new Doctor Who, where you know, because Doctor Who right now is black, you know, it's a black man, and
Okay.
there's this one part that deals with racism, and they get through these monsters. He gets these beautiful white people to a point where he can save them. You know, he has a spaceship and he can get all of them out, right? And then she's like, "Oh no, I'm not going anywhere with you."
Hmm.
And he's like, "Wait a minute. If you go out there, you will die. You're going to die on this planet. You're going to get sick and die. I can save you with my spaceship. All of you can fit in my spaceship." And she's looking at him like, mm-mm. And so he goes through this spectrum of emotion of like, I cannot believe I'm seeing this. He cries because he's sad for the fact that these people are going to die. He laughs at them and he's angered at the same time. That's what our experience is with the craziness that we deal with on a day-to-day basis being black in America.
Yes, indeed. Okay, actually, that leads me right into our last section, a bit of
Okay.
speculation I want to engage you in here, John. Um, Fam, if you were given all the creative and monetary resources to produce a horror film that addresses our current political moment, what would it be about?
What would it be about? That's interesting. Because essentially what we're dealing with is like a cult, right? I mean, there's a cultish aspect to it, right?
Hmm.
So I'm thinking some type of like cosmic horror influenced thing, you know, that deals with cult, you know, because cosmic horror sometimes deals with cults and stuff. I believe that the monster that we're fighting against is Mammon, the demon
Ooh.
of greed, you know. Yeah, we have a God that we worship. The nation under God is not the God in heaven or the God that we worship on a day-to-day basis in our spirit. It's a constructed God that hungers for money and greed. So that's the thing I would do. I was like, that's the creature. Because, you know, a monster is a metaphor. Every time you have a monster is a medium for understanding, like what does that society think about a particular thing. My monster that I think about is greed. You know, it's a creature that actually just eats everything, right? So that's the thing that is fueling America. It always has fueled America is, you know, greed. You know, so I would actually probably come up with like a procedural of some kind, where like there's a black led like team of people that would probably go into this space and experiment and actually like, you know, and try to like figure that out and kind of expose it to a certain degree. The other thing too, though, is like what really trips me out are the black people who have fallen into this cult too. So I
Yeah.
wonder if there was like, shoot, we might have to do this movie, man.
Yeah,
Because
man, I want to
I'm
get the
like, wait a
kick
minute,
started
hold on,
going.
because I'm like, wait a minute. You ever seen this movie called The Drop Squad?
Yeah, yeah.
See, it's not the best movie though. It's not. It
Wait,
doesn't really. Hit.
you talking about the remake with Omar Epps? You talking about the film?
No. It's a film. The Drop Squad. Did they do a remake of The Drop Squad? Because you know, The Drop Squad is about a team of people that basically go and deprogram black folk who have betrayed their
Oh
race.
shit! No, I'm thinking of something else.
Yeah.
Word. Okay.
Yeah, so they go and they kidnap these black, you know, right wingers and like people who are like, you know, on the side of white supremacy, and they deprogram them. They get essentially what they do is they get them out the sunken place. Essentially, yeah,
Mm,
that's what they do. Because that's a great metaphor, by the way. That's one of the things that Peel gave us as the sunken place metaphor.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Actually,
Anyway, so yeah, so that's what I would do. I would do something like that, you know.
yeah, I love it. I love it. I want to get the Kickstarter launch like
Yeah, for real.
tomorrow.
I'm like, dang, like I might have to shoot. I'm
I'm like,
like,
please, please do. Just got a couple more questions for you, John.
mm.
You mentioned the gift that Jordan Peele offered us through this metaphor of the sunken place. I'm curious if that's been kind of taken up, or if you identified like any other kind of trends and tropes with regards to black horror. Any ideas on where the genre is headed?
What are genres headed? You know, that's hard to say. I mean, I think that we're always changing. I mean, as soon as I say something, it's gonna shift. You know, I do think it's always current. You know, I do think that you know the best horror always deals with what, like you said, what's going on now. You know, what I've been really into personally is what I call the what did I call it? I think I call it the Afro weird. You know,
Oh,
yeah. So I was looking at like I'm slipping a lot more into Afro surrealism. You know, like stuff by like people like Terrence Nance and Henry Dumas and folk and you know my friend Santi Gold, people who like work in that space, and you know stuff like Sorry to Bother You, you know stuff like that are really really interesting, ways, because it kind of looks at the strangeness of what it means to be alive and be black in this space. The strangeness of what it means to be black in America in the present. D. Scott Miller talks a lot about that in his manifesto too. He's a great scholar who studies Afro surrealism and actually like kind of the godfather in some ways with his connection with Amiri Baraka. Because Amiri Baraka came up with the term in this particular hemisphere because he was talking about Henry Dumas's work. So I think the surrealness of the strangeness, because people talk about the ennui, the strangeness of what it means to be alive in this space, and to know what we know, and how so many people don't understand what we know. It's just off-putting, like, don't you know? But then the other thing is like the weird, so the weird is like a type of fiction that, H.P. Lovecraft and some other people were like, spearheaded. It's the strangeness that happens after the Gothic. So the Gothic deals with like ghosts and witches and vampires, those traditional like tropes, and it has all these different things that connected to horror. The weird starts to push past that into like other worlds and other realms and creatures that are hiding between the cracks, that kind of stuff, the strange. So I came with this term, the Afro weird. So I basically use the weird with the political natures of the Afro surreal. So people like Ishmael Reed, for instance, I would say is an Afro surrealist. People like that.
Yeah. Okay. Ooh wee. Oh shit. Before I forget, I have to ask you this. Last week we had on a guest, who I believe you're very familiar with, Adrienne Marie Brown.
Yeah.
And she really wanted us to ask you this question. Specifically, the way in which you approached the cover, the design for Octavia's Brood, and that mythology of speculative fiction. She wanted you to speak about the system of glyphs that exists in that cover. Had no idea. I've been holding on to that book for well over a decade. Please tell us about the secret glyphs that's going on in that cover.
Well, I'm really into like language, as far as like symbols and language, but as a designer, it's one of the things that attracted me. And so the first thing I thought about was the fact that, these are Black secret technologies. Like I said, I'm really into that idea of like hidden languages and hidden figures, so to speak, that are like fitting between the things, And so what I did was I tried to get a sense of like what each story was about, and then use my acumen as a designer to come up with like something that looks like image systems for each story. And then what I did is I did an outline of Octavia Butler's, face, because that's a outline of Octavia Butler actually on the cover, and how she's filled with community, because each one of those things is community. What I'm saying? That's what it is. Like, so she is the progenitor of the brood. A brood is a collection of people, right? So yeah, so all these different symbols represent the different stories from the different activists that are on the ground. That's how I came up with the term the Black speculative arts movement. Actually, I coined that term. Yeah, and so because I was looking at the fact that the work that we've created as Black people has always been in opposition to our oppression. We've always used stories. We've always used song. We've always used artwork to do it. And whether you call it the New Negro movement or the Black Arts movement or what have you, Afro Cobra, whatever, we're using art to fight. Always have, And so what I like about what's happening now, though, is that there's an explicit connection between activism and speculation, right? It's very explicit. And so that's what it's the Black speculative arts movement, right? Because we've always written science fiction. Du Bois wrote The Princess Steele in the 1900s, like way before the term way before the term science fiction was even used in common practice. He wrote The Princess Steele in 1906, 1909. Yeah, people like the sister that wrote Of One Blood. Wasn't it in the 1800s? You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
Yeah, so we were writing science fiction before it even really was a thing, and we keep discovering the fact that we were always dreaming of better futures, and also using speculation to critique, the now, because horror and science fiction is all about what's happening now.
Yes, indeed.
But we use it as a way to distance ourselves so we can look at it from different sides and stuff, and to make it palatable to our counterparts who might not be ready to have the same conversations that we are about race and about oppression,
Yes. Oh my God. Okay. One last question, fam. Still holding on to the Black speculative arts tradition. Thank you so much for offering that to us as a lens to understand our history of culture production, where it's been, where we are, where we're going.
Yes.
One last question, speculation for you. Here at PushBlack, we've cohered something called Liberation Island. Black Liberation Island. Everyone is invited. And John, you are tasked with contributing to our library.
Okay.
So we're asking you if you could only bring one film, one album, and one book to contribute to the Black Liberation Island Library, what would you choose and why?
We said one film, one book,
and one album.
I think the album, if I had to take one album to that Black Liberation album, it would probably be Songs in the Key of Life, by Stevie Wonder, Yeah, I love that album so much. It's so beautiful, and I can listen to it all day, forever, Yeah, it's just pure creativity. It's like someone at the height of their powers who, I think, is a prototypical Afrofuturist. He's talking about Saturn, he's talking about a love that is transcendental and otherworldly. He's talking about seeing things with his third eye because he's blind, but he sees everything. So that's a very powerful album to me. A book, oh, that's hard. Woo, what would that be? Oh man, to survive on this island, man, I don't know. It'd probably be something like, it'd probably be an anthology, like maybe Black Fire or something like that, where it's a book that actually has a lot of stories. Maybe even that collection that Skip Gates put together, like the African American folk tales and stuff.
Okay.
So we don't forget our history. Oh, you know what? Another great book. I'm sorry, I'm cheating. Might be Creating Black Americans, maybe by Nell Irvin Painter. I love that book, man, because it's like a beautiful volume about like just Black history, but also it has all this gorgeous like art in it by Black people too. It's one of my favorite books. So maybe that book.
Okay.
Creating Black Americans. Okay, and what was the other thing?
One film.
A film. Oh, that's tough too. Because I'm like, there's so many great films. And I'm thinking about Black film in particular, right? So I'm thinking something like Do the Right Thing, or like, Watermelon Woman is also like a favorite of mine too, because it talks so much about, she's one of my favorite filmmakers. I'm a big fan. Watermelon Woman is a powerful film because it talks about critical fabulation, I'm really into that, so that's like, that's hard, man, because I'm like so many hit, and then there's something like Chameleon Street, which a lot of people haven't seen, so I'm like, that's tough. That is a hard idea, man. I was like, I don't know. I'm thinking Do the Right Thing. You know what I'm saying? Okay. I think Do the Right Thing would probably be one that I would bring, If I had to pick, something that really transformed me as a young man watching. Yeah. The fact that was written and produced by a Black man, and what it deals with, and about our own agency, and about where we deserve to be. Mm-hmm. We deserve to be on that wall, that kind of thing. We deserve to be. And even if we have to burn the wall to get there, what I'm saying? But also too, his notion of film in that book too. I mean, in that book, but in that film as well. Like I totally forgot, like when Radio Raheem is doing the Love and Hate, that it's a
it's a throwback, callback.
It's a throwback to like Night of the Hunter. Yeah, I was like, oh, stuff like that, man. Yeah, because I'm all about the hip hop, and yeah. So I think I covered all my stuff. It wouldn't be necessarily a horror movie, obviously, but it is horrific in its own way,